The questions that, in a sense, keeps me up at night, is whether the current way of systems innovation is capable of disrupting the powers that breed the problems we see in the systems we work in. Many of us are working in almost disparate sectors. There are people working in the energy sector and water and food. And from time to time, as I think Linda said, we make connections with other systems. And can these innovations produce a fit world, particularly given the urgency of the problem that we are facing, a fit world for majority of people? Do we need to innovate within the systems, or do we need to think of a new paradigm altogether? A paradigm that brings together a new system, perhaps that these other systems are part of. So in thinking of my work and looking through the various systems and various works I've done in various systems, it seems to me, it's becoming clearer that I would say that there exists, this, I'll call it a meta system in which these various systems operate. And, this meta system, in a sense, informs the problem we see in this other system. I come from the oil-rich Delta, Niger Delta part of Nigeria, and I think we know the problems that face the regions that have resources. It's poverty, it's the disruption of ways of living, it's pollution and exploitation. So these things, it's not. I think my community, sharing those struggles, and we see the actions of multinational companies or corporations, ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, combine that with weak institutions and corruption and poor leadership, and the effect and the impact it has on many systems, on health, education, the economy. And arguably, people would say it comes with benefits. Some might argue against that. What I tend to see in my work and around, people who think of systems innovation is for the health people to go into their own corner and try to innovate. And for the energy people, to coalesce around the question of energy and seek innovation around that topic. But I think that there is an opportunity for greater impact to think of these problems at the meta-systemic level. I think I said this meta-systemic level is a system that these other systems operate in. And I see three sort of interrelated problems with this system. And I will just go through very quickly the three problems, and I think I'll have another time to talk particularly to some of the work that I'm doing. The first is about the configuration of power, and here I'm thinking about the asymmetric power relations between the global south and the north. I'm thinking about the legacies of colonization and probably the new colonial trappings. I'm thinking of the civilization problem of capitalism, that is breeding, I really love that picture. I don't know which city was that where, we see a lot of fog and even climate change. I think it springs from this civilization problem of capitalism. And, there are also problems that arises from the restrictive walls of race and gender and sexism, and all of that, nationalism. So that is the first problem I see with this meta system, and I think it comes with unique opportunities. The second problem is the lack of, what I would call cognitive justice. And I borrowed the term cognitive justice from a Portuguese sociologist and philosopher, De Salso Santos. And he thinks of cognitive justice as a recognition of the diverse ways of knowing in which human beings across the globe, make sense of their world and make sense of their experiences. And I think this meta system does not allow knowledge to be democratized. And, there is no acknowledgement that there are many forms of knowing which are legitimate and valid. For instance, if you think of climate change, how are the people, how probably, going back to pre-civilized area, and I use the word civilized in a very colonial sense, colonialism, thought of itself as a civilizing mission, which was very wrong. And I think it distorted these ways of knowing, where people used to find sustainable ways of planting and sustainable ways of generating energy for themselves, and probably, devising their own political systems rather than, the tension that comes with majoritarian democracies or liberal democracies. So that is the second problem. And I think, we could see how that insistence on one way of knowing fits into the problems that we find in the various systems that we try to innovate. And the third problem that I see, in this meta system is that it doesn't allow room for various conceptions of what it means to be human. We tend to think of solutions as, very top-down, and we are not paying attention to the cultural context, or show very little regard to cultural sensitivities and to histories of the people. And we are not allowing people to be in charge of their own destinies, and to probably know that they can innovate and find solutions to their problems. So what would it mean to target innovations at this meta systemic level? I think that is a question I want to pose without necessarily answering it. Could we innovate at that level, or do we need a paradigm shift altogether? And I think the benefit of having a hub in Africa is that we can begin to ponder or think very carefully about these sort of questions, and say, okay, how do we proceed? What will bring about the greatest impact, to our people, in the midst of all these problems that we listed. So that is the opportunities, and the problems that I see in the current formulation or in the current setup. And I think, if we are to, we need to disrupt the power in the system for there to be a maximal impact, because I think when we think of systems innovation, we are thinking of bringing tangible, meaningful, impact to people. It's always people at the center. And there are powers that are holding the system in place. And sometimes just, circle around the issues without really tackling the issue. So Asen, I guess that is my first response. And I hope, in the second round, I will get a chance to share some of the work that I'm doing.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. That was insightful. I see some provoking thoughts there. I spoke about power dynamics, meta system, quite interesting. And that's touched on what Linda was trying to say earlier on. But I'll come back to you, Andrew.